Welcome to The Glass Ceiling, the podcast where business leaders share their stories, struggles and triumphs.
There is a lot in that. There's a lot of learning.
We sort of had different views on how the business should be ran.
The next 10 years looks like for South Australia.
Startup's the easiest.
I'm your host, Marissa Hankinson from Wavebreaker, and I'm passionate about amplifying their voices. Join me as we explore the highs and lows of innovation, entrepreneurship and leadership. From founders to CEOs, our guests will share their insights, experiences and advice on how to succeed and make a lasting impact. Get ready for inspiring conversations and valuable lessons. Let's shatter the glass ceiling, one story at a time. Cassie, thank you very much for coming on to the Glass Ceiling podcast. It's an absolute pleasure to have you on here. I just want to do a little bit of an intro for our listeners so they know who you are. So Cassie Day is a seasoned business leader and passionate advocate for the disability and care sectors. With extensive experience in business development, consultancy and coaching, Cassie empowers business leaders to achieve their goals and drive positive impact. As the founder of the Carers Place and Connect and Collaborate events, Cassie brings a unique blend of expertise, passion and authenticity to her work. Now as a champion of business professionals for the all-purpose sectors, Cassie is dedicated to making a lasting difference. Welcome to the show, Cassie.
Thank you so much for having me. Absolute pleasure.
It is. And it sounds like it's been a bit of a whirlwind few years for you. So I just want to, sometimes I like to go back for our listeners to have a chat. So March last year?
Yes.
What happened?
I walked away from my business baby, the Carers Place, and I sold that. The 10th of March will be a year since I walked away, which was a huge decision for me. Absolutely massive, but absolutely the right one. And I have zero regrets about doing it.
Yeah. So you had that business for 8 years?
Yes.
Yes, that's a long time. It does become your baby. And did you found that on your own?
Yeah, I did. Early days, I had no business being in business, but, like most entrepreneurs, we're here to solve problems, right? And I had personal and professional sort of, I guess, influences that drove me to start that business. And, it was just me. It was never going to be this business that impacted thousands of people's lives, but I guess I followed a natural flow and realised that there was such a need in the sector for the way that we were doing business. But also I really wanted to champion and support people who needed flexibility in their work, particularly women who were carers and parents who might not have otherwise had an opportunity to have, a professional life, to have a career. And so it grew organically. And, I'm exceptionally proud of what we did and the impacts that we had, but it was time.
Yeah. So the Carers Place was NDIS services, and you would support the carers, the parents, to ensure that they got the right services for who they were caring for?
Yeah. So it was an NDIS business, so a support coordination agency. And essentially we demystified, provided clarity for people who were parents, carers, but also people who have disability to navigate that space. It's exceptionally complex, as you can probably understand. So National Disability Insurance Scheme. I struggled for 2 years myself to try and navigate the scheme. My son had a plan. We didn't use it because I just didn't know what to do.
And I think the problem is we've got a personal friend. If you don't utilise it, it gets taken away from you. So there's a little bit of a catch-22 situation with a lot of people trying to access these services.
And I thought, if I'm struggling to understand this, I'm a very privileged person. I'm relatively bright. And if I'm confused and I'm overwhelmed, what's happening to the people who are more vulnerable than me?
Yeah.
Right? And this is not okay. So I decided to do something about it.
Yeah. So when you actually sold the business, what had that got to, staff-wise, client level-wise? What sort of volume?
Yeah.
You started out on your own and it grew organically. Just for my idea, what did it get to?
Yeah. It was definitely a zero or a minus to, 7-figure business. it, we ended up having 12 staff, which included myself. I think at the time I sold, we had just over 300 families that we supported. I supported hundreds and hundreds of businesses within the sector as well, and thousands online. And, that it came from a small idea where, I could give something, of myself and provide, this professional meets lived experience and help people through in a way where they weren't going to be taken advantage of, and they were going to get the real and the practical and the support that was meaningful,
Yeah. So based on that, your previous experience had been government.
Yes.
So you were, as you said, bright, privileged, but in some respects you understood legislation.
Yeah.
You understood advocacy in that space because of your role.
Yes.
And how long you were with government?
Yeah. So I started my career in government. 16 years I was there. I started in the minister's office and moved into human resources and health and safety and leadership roles there and in training roles there. And, a huge part of that was, interpreting legislation, but also supporting people to get what they want and what they needed within the guise of legislation, but being creative at the same time.
Very, very transferable skills. Now you've mentioned that you did have lived experience.
Yeah.
So you've got 2 children?
I have 2 adult children. Yes, they're
It's okay.
21 and 23 now.
We don't ask ages here. It's okay. And your lived experience was with your eldest, Matt.
Yeah.
So would you want to expand a little bit on that for us?
Matthew was born 4 weeks of age. He was diagnosed with cystic fibrosis, which I had no idea what that was. I thought it was a physical disability, but it affects the lungs and digestive system. And over the years, we realized that he had some challenges from a learning perspective and those sorts of things as well, which we now know he's autistic and he has ADHD. So cystic fibrosis, autism, and then when he was 9 years old, he fell 5 meters out of a tree and broke his little body, really. So he has a brain injury. And, they're all lifelong. They all have lifelong impacts. And, I guess it's not just the impact on him, but it's also on the rest of the family, right? Josh as his sibling, us as parents, and what I can do and how I live my life and the things that we need to be aware of. It impacts every aspect of life, including business.
Yes. And it's really hard to meet that balance, because if you think about it, you're working for a living, you're being a carer as well as a mum. And then you've got to navigate the family dynamics and that kind of thing. So what you said, you took a career break after being in the minister's office for a while. Yeah.
So I intended 6 weeks after Matthew was born to go back to work. I was going to, be this new age full-time worker, and Dad was going to stay home. It obviously didn't work like that. And so when I went back to work, it was very part-time, which was exceptionally difficult for me because I was a career woman.
And let's be honest, I did something very, very similar, Cassie.
Yeah.
And even though you're part-time, you have this complete guilt that you don't want your
the mother load.
Well, not even the mother load, but I felt, even though I was doing part-time hours, I was doing full-time out my output, because you feel guilty that you're leaving at 2:30 and other people are there. But you sort of overcompensate, not necessarily financially, but you do.
Yeah.
So
Give, and you feel guilty on this side, and you feel
the same age. So 100% getting you on this one.
Guilt it runs rampant. Apparently, it doesn't serve any purpose though, but it's still there, right? You can tell yourself that, but it's still there, and you want to be everything for everyone. And I can do it all. Apparently not, but look, I worked for 16 years, mostly in the HR area, and after Matthew had his fall, I took 6 months off because he needed constant rehab, right? And throughout that time, I gained, I guess, this perspective that I've got so much more to give, and there's more to life, but I actually need to live in a different way, right? Because it changed everything.
Yeah.
And so I left government, trained as a personal trainer and a wellbeing coach. And, you know, that was my first business. I lent into that about a year later.
Yeah.
And which was wonderful while it lasted, but Matthew got really, really sick again. And so I needed to sort of shelve that. And that was back in 2015, 2016.
Yeah. And it's interesting because you can't separate your career with your personal life. They are interchangeable. There are always ebbs and flows, needs that need to be met that impact your decisions at that time. And sometimes you just, you know, you've got you and you've got your goals, etc. But sometimes you've just got to put them aside because there are bigger needs at that time.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so you ran that was good that you ran that business, the personal training. And I'm suspecting that the seeing the result of the rehab that Matt had and the impact that personal training could have and physical health is good. But you combine that with well-being as well, which for me is more of the mental health. And how's that impacted you or your awareness in yourself?
It was really interesting because it was, you know, 6 months before Matthew had his accident, I was burnt out as a carer, right? And I decided to really put myself first. And so that was what had led to being a personal trainer in the long term. And, you know, I realized at that point, if I don't look after myself and I'm not okay, then how can I give the best to him and to Joshua and to our family? And I realized as I was going through that process, the better I was, the better they were as well. And so that's sort of always been an undertone or an underpinning thing that's followed me right throughout, you know, the last 10 years in particular. And so when I set up the Carers Place, that's where I started. It was supporting carers and parents to look after themselves and to be informed, but to take the time so they can give the best of themselves to the people that they care for. And that's really where the inspiration of the Carers Place came from. And it evolved from there. And so then when we went into support coordination, which was the NDIS side of things, we incorporated that into everything that we did. And so there were other support coordination agencies who worked with the person with a disability, and that was kind of it. And it was very clinical, whereas we embraced the entire family and supported the entire family unit and made sure that they were connected into supports and services for all of them, not only the person with a disability.
It's interesting because I've just had my parents over from the UK for 2 months, and my mum is full-time carer to my dad, unfortunately. And one of the things I have noticed is that my mum seems to get, and this is the UK system, not Australia, but they recognise that my mum is a carer and the role that she has with my dad. So we're finding that appointments and things like that that take care of my mum are a lot quicker than if they, you know, if she would just had normal. And I understand that because it's another role that she has that is assisting the health system as well as, you know, supporting and caring for my dad. So it's interesting that I'm starting to see that very differently now. And as you say, it has to be holistic.
It does have to be holistic. And I think here in Australia, we've still got a really long way to go in regard to recognising carers in particular and the role that they play and the, you know, the billions of dollars that they literally save our economy every year, right? They just do. And I think also, you know, we have typically support for carers of, you know, partners who are aging or who have dementia. But for many years, we just haven't recognised carers of young people who have disability or, you know, neurodivergence or what have you.
Because it's just, isn't that what a mum or a parent does?
Well, that's exactly right. That was, I think Matthew was 16 before I realised that I was a carer, before it twigged to me that I was a carer. because I just did what I did because I loved him. He's my baby. It's my responsibility. And I will do everything I can to support him.
100%.
And both of my children, right?
Yeah.
That's what you do.
And it's probably interesting that you've mentioned autism and ADHD, which probably went undiagnosed in Matt for
of course it did.
a very long time.
Yeah, in fact, I knew that Joshua, my youngest, had ADHD. He didn't have it diagnosed. He'd seen psychologists. There was no point for him. We weren't going to go down the medication route. It wasn't that impactful that he needed intervention. But interestingly, I was diagnosed 18 months ago with ADHD and as autistic as well. I had no idea.
No.
I just danced to the beat of a different drum, right? When I was a kid, I just did. And so,
but I think
it's fascinating.
You know, it's probably contributed to the success that you've had.
Of course.
You know. So but you mentioned that Matt has got help now and has got some like great medication. And you sort of weirdly, as you said, 16 before you realized that you were actually a carer. And then when did Matt get the medication?
Yeah, so I'll just give you a brief backstory. So cystic fibrosis is degenerative, right? And whilst it affects many systems, it affects the lungs in particular. And over time, they degenerate, they get infection, they get scarring. And he got to the point 3 years ago where he was so sick that he was in hospital more than he wasn't. And so it felt to him like he was drowning. He was trying to breathe underwater. And, you know, there was a period of advocacy, like years and years of advocacy for this medication called Trikafta. We knew that he was on the downward sort of spiral. And, you know, that was really confronting. But successfully, we were able to advocate for this medication, which is like $300,000 a year.
Oh, my gosh.
Per person, right? So it's not cheap. But within a week of him having this medication, his entire life started to change. He coughed all the time, 24/7. His cough stopped. And, you know, 3 years down the track, or almost 3 years down the track, he hasn't been in hospital since. Now, like, this is just outrageous. So this is a young person who, between his cystic fibrosis and his debilitating mental health, just couldn't leave the house. He had never hopped on a train. He'd never, you know, called anyone. He couldn't talk on a video call. He was reliant on us. And all of a sudden, you know, over the last 3 years, he's living life on his terms. He looks after all of his own medical, which, you know, he's not
that must
cured.
Be such, and I don't want to say the wrong word, but it must feel a relief to you.
Just, I think it's just an immense amount of gratitude. You know, he's got this whole future that he's looking at that he could never have imagined before. And so do we.
Yeah,
right?
So do you now.
So does my life. My life looks completely different. And as selfish as that might sound, I couldn't be happier, right? Yeah. Because you don't want your young people to suffer. You don't want your kids to suffer. It's horrendous. It's absolutely horrendous to watch, and you're powerless, really, in the most part, to do much about it. And so, you know, all of this development, you know, he got his license, his P plates, you know, a few weeks ago. That would never have happened.
That's like such independence.
He's learning to be a support worker. He finished high school last year as a starlight wish. Him and Joshua went to Tasmania and with a mentor and hiked the overland track. That's an 8-day hike in the absolute wilderness, self-sufficient, you know, like extraordinary. He went from having, you know, a 40-50% lung function to 80%, not ever coughing anymore. And, you know, he has this whole future. It's just extraordinary. But you do get, you know, you talked about guilt before. You also get guilt, you know, survivor guilt.
Mm.
You know, for those who perhaps haven't had the opportunity at accessing this drug, perhaps it's too late for them.
Yeah.
You know, and there's very few people like me who, you know, are determined, I guess, destined to be carers forever,
Yeah.
where that changes. Like,
Yeah.
yeah. So
And it's part
immense
of your
gratitude.
makeup, isn't it, really? About that caring. You know, you had your personal experience with Matt, and you know, you are a mum to Josh as well.
Yeah.
Then you moved it, you know, you continued in that space.
Give. Yeah.
And even, you know, talking about your role in government, HR is not an easy role.
No.
That is such a giving, caring role.
Yeah.
You know, it definitely takes a lot from you as well, you know, especially emotionally, as well as having that business mindset as well. You know, I do think HR and managing people or navigating that is a lot. So it sounds like you're
it's
very
innate.
much you're definitely a giver in this world. But obviously March was a catalyst.
Yes.
So you took some time out for yourself. So selling the business.
Yeah.
It's interesting is because selling the business, you feel that would be big pat on the back. You know, I've sold something, I've built something, I'm letting it go on. Was there a specific reason at that time that you felt it was right for you to sell the business?
Yeah, there were three reasons, and obviously Matthew's health was one of those, and sort of looking at, you know, I was going to give and support people forever and a day, and all of a sudden I've got this potential future that I never had sort of looked at, and I hadn't stopped and caught my breath. I was burnt out. I was exhausted because he had been so sick, and so had my husband in other ways for a year as well. So it was a huge load, and my girlfriend was dying, and so big discussions with her about where to next were really influential on what I did. I was exhausted, and you know, the NDIS and the focus of the NDIS was certainly changing. So we had a big review in 2023, and the outcomes of that review just meant that the way that my business would have to pivot wasn't in alignment with my values.
And was that because it was going more clinical and not having that holisticness?
Absolutely.
And moving that element of the role of carer and the impact on the unit, really?
Because we were so targeted specifically to each person, right, in terms of what they needed and how they needed it, and we were immensely creative, right? We would go to businesses all the time. Have you thought about this? Can you do this? Can we create something for this person that looks like this? We're
very tailored.
Very, very tailored. And I mean, we've launched many a business, you know, into the stratosphere because of that. But you're right, it's moving into a very clinical, whether it's, you know, like a Medicare kind of transactional space. And that just wasn't for me. Yeah. It just wasn't for me. And I've got a lot to do in this world. I've got a lot to give, and I have huge impact to, you know, sort of, you know, in the short and long term, be able to give to people and to community. And I couldn't do it that way anymore. And I was stifled. I got to the point where I was so sucked into leading and managing that I actually couldn't do what I loved most.
So all of a sudden, no business. The business is gone?
No, because it wasn't in my plans to sell, right?
No,
it was.
So, and then all of a sudden, Matt's off to Tassie and he's doing these things. And then all of a sudden, you know, unfortunately, what was Cassie doing with herself then?
Oh, well, 2 days after the sale went through, I hopped on a plane and met my husband over in Queensland, and we travelled for 4 weeks. And when I got back, my girlfriend was very unwell. And so I spent, you know, a period of 8 weeks loving and supporting her and doing, you know, what I could. And then after she passed, we travelled for 3 months in the Northern Territory. But, you know, it wasn't like, oh, yes, you know, this is amazing. Like you said before, I've sold my business and it's all wonderful and congratulations. You navigated a successful exit. It wasn't like that. It then dawned on me, I had to deal with myself and emotions and, you know, the roller coaster that is, you know, doing that. And, you know, are people going to think that I'm a sellout? You know, have I sold out? Have I, you know, what are people going to think of me? It was really interesting, but apparently that's none of my business what people think of me anyway, right?
Yeah, I think that's you can't control that.
No,
It's completely out of your control having that.
It is, and we're meaning-making machines, right, as people. If we don't know what the truth is between point A and point B, we're just going to make it up. Yeah. And so I kind of had to let myself off the hook there. But that was, you know, through a lot of immersing myself in nature, learning to not do all the time and to be.
Yeah, to be
which is a
present.
Really interesting space. And you know,
something I'm really uncomfortable with, by the way. It's just like,
because I don't know about you, but I'm go. There's always something that I'm working towards, and I'm not busy for being busy's sake. You know, I want to achieve big things.
Yeah.
And so having to sit in that discomfort of not knowing where to next.
Yeah.
Did that for about 9 months, sitting deep in that discomfort. It was a really interesting process. But it was essential, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of people now sort of see me and they're like, wow, you look so good. I didn't realize that you didn't look good before. And it was the stress and the overwhelm.
Like your weight's lifted.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's amazing how you don't think it takes a physical, like visual turmoil on you, but it can.
Oh, and it does. And that's, you know, being a carer and giving also not so much personally, but in business as well, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's huge.
So you sat for 9 months. It sounds like 9 months is really strange because that's like the time for having a baby.
Well, there you go. I birthed a new me, right?
You birthed a new Cassie. So what is the future like for Cassie?
Yeah. There's still some unknown. I've always sort of believed, well, certainly in the last 3 years in particular, lean into life with an open heart and an open mind, right?
Yeah.
Because you never know what's around the corner.
Yeah.
Certainly working with businesses to help amplify their impact, to help them.
And you're definitely going into that for-purpose sector.
For-purpose sector, absolutely. Which is, you know, where I can give the best of myself.
Yeah.
But more so, I'm relaunching my events, really wanting to bring different sectors together to create, I guess, collaboration and partnerships to be able to move through, you know, this next phase where there's a lot of change within all of these for-purpose sectors, whether it's through social enterprise, whether it's through disability, health, aged care. Yeah. There's a lot of change that's happening, and we need each other more now than ever. So championing businesses and leaders to be able to, you know, have the impact they desire without having to forsake their own health, their own mental health, but also for them to be able to be sustainable, because let's face it, trying to do business these days is really bloody hard. And financially, whilst it might look all glossy on the outside, most businesses are struggling to break even.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think in the for-purpose sector, where an element of that is reliant on government.
Yep.
When there is any legislation change, or, you know, that is I think in comparison to a lot of other businesses where they may not have that funding or government reliance, that really can, you know, pull the rug under certain businesses. Yeah. So that sustainability and is key to moving forward, or, you know, continuing to being around and to continue to support.
It is.
And make the difference.
I think I see, and you probably see this as well, where there's a lot of businesses in this space where they're only reliant on one source of revenue. And
there's no diversification.
Very, very, very dangerous. And so looking at ways and providing ideas for diversification. And it doesn't mean you need to do all the things.
No, it doesn't mean. You need to balance that risk a little bit more. Yeah, you know, one of our previous guests says, you know, it's really important with the risk that you don't put all your eggs in one basket.
Absolutely. And, you know, it doesn't mean that you can't grow. you absolutely can. It's a huge thing, but there's a whole host of ways to be able to diversify, but also be smart in the back end of business so that you've got the resources and revenue to reinvest and to be able to scale your business.
And that's probably your experience in business of having those efficiencies and looking operationally and looking with a different lens. It's interesting that you were in business, but when you're working with these other businesces, they're too in it.
To come
exactly
in,
right. It's
fresh eyes.
Just that fresh eyes, that new lens can make a difference.
Yeah, absolutely it can. So, I'll work, I'll bring these events to life this year, which is really exciting.
And I've heard that people have missed them, by the way.
Yeah.
I have heard this. I've heard that.
No, it wasn't actually on my agenda. And, all of this sort of silly self-talk that I had, when I came back sort of into Adelaide last year after I did travel, that was exactly what I heard, that they'd missed the events, they'd missed me, that the sector wasn't the same anymore. And kind of, it was really surprising to me. So I feel like I have a duty to be able to re-spark and reignite and excite people again in this space.
And I think, with some of the changes in NDIS, it makes it a bit more of a competitive space. And this, as you say, the co-opetition and collaboration is something that is needed.
It is.
Even more so if on the other side it's being driven a different way.
Yeah. Well, that's why they were started back in 2022, was like, there's actually room enough for us all. Leave your ego at the door. This is bigger than us. Let's come together.
And that's true, because unfortunately there is more demand.
Of course there is.
Than, and that's unfortunately a sad truth. But there is more demand.
So let's work smarter, not harder. And be creative, work together, because we can achieve amazing things together. If we're going to work and operate in a space of competition, who's going to, lose? Everyone. Everyone, well, most people are going to lose, particularly the people we're here to support and serve. So, there's certainly work to do there. And I look forward to that. Egotistically, it's lovely to hear that people missed me, I mean, at the end of the day, as much as it's not my business to worry about what anyone else thinks of me, I still care. We all still care, don't we?
We do.
And that is nice. And that does sort of add to that driving force. I've still got work to do here. So just in a different way.
So if our listeners wanted to reach out and find out how to get in touch with Cassie Day, how would they do that now?
They can hop on my website, cassieday.com. Very complex. They can check me out on LinkedIn. That's probably the best place for me. And they can send me an email at cassie@cassieday.com.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And I wish Matt and Josh all the best and hope that continues. And just to say, I've personally lost a very, very good friend, a girlfriend, and it's amazing how it's a big hole to fill. So I am sorry for your loss as well.
Thank you.
So,
appreciate that.
Thank you very much for being on the show, and on to Glass Ceiling, Cassie.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of The Glass Ceiling. If you've liked what you heard, please subscribe, as we'd love to have you as part of our community. We're grateful to our guests for sharing their inspiring stories and insights with us. This podcast was brought to you by Wavebreaker. Join us next time as we shatter the glass ceiling, one story at a time.